Welcome in to Duel of the Greats. You will notice this is not our normal introduction audio, and this is not the normal voice that you hear at the beginning. This is your co host, Nathan Carter. About a week and a half before recording this episode, my father, Chris Carter, passed away. He was a great lover of movies, and as his body slowly began to weaken, one of the things that he was still able to do pretty consistently was watch movies, and he loved it and he never grew tired of it. As a matter of fact, one of the very last things that he did in his life was watch the film School Days with me for the recording of the first episode of this season of this podcast. So we would like to dedicate this episode to Chris Carter, a great lover of movies, and we appreciate all of you listening as he did. And without further ado, this is episode 2 of season 2 of Duel of the Greats.
Just want to go out and like really, really do something.
I say it, I say it again. You've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked. Bamboozled.
It's a celebration, fellas. Salute.
Always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
The way of the future.
The way of the future.
The way of the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to Duel of the Greats, Season 2, Episode 2. It's best of the best week, fellas, just like we did last season. We're going to do the two best movies for these two directors. Now, last year it was a little bit easier. It was a little bit more clear-cut because both Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott had one movie apiece that had won Best Picture. So that was the easiest ones to pick out there. But for these two directors, they have neither... Martin Scorsese has one movie that has won Best Picture, The Departed, and then Spike Lee has not had any movie that's won Best Picture, even though he's had a couple that have been nominated. So this was kind of a go by feel almost sort of decision we had here, where we both know, or all of us know, being in the enmeshed in the film world and everything. What is generally considered the two sort of the magnum opus movie for both directors, and for both of those, it is Goodfellas for Martin Scorsese and Do the Right Thing for Spike Lee. So those are the two movies that we're going to be talking about this week. We can kind of jump right in. Do you guys have any first experiences with these movies, first impressions, anything that you want to share?
I think I mentioned this last week, or if I mentioned it off air, I'll mention it again. I was insanely old the first time I saw Goodfellas. For many, many years, what I consider the two most famous films I'd never seen were Goodfellas and Lawrence of Arabia. And it was actually over the pandemic in the year 2020 when we were all sitting at home. Goodfellas was available for streaming, and I sat and I decided to watch it. And that was the very first time I had seen Goodfellas. Do the Right Thing for me was kind of like I said for Spike Lee. It was a college film for me. I actually saw that for the very first time in a college class and remember being really moved by it when I was 19, 20 years old. And I pick up different things from it every time that I watch it, but I remember it having a really profound impact on me, just not only as a storyteller and a filmmaker, but kind of just as an American citizen and what it says about race relations in this country. So those are sort of my two experiences. Steve, what about you?
Goodfellas, I watched way too late. I should have watched it a lot earlier, being one of the classics that it is. But I don't have any particular standout memories aside from just being blown away by how awesome it was, so to speak, and so many things just being in the zeitgeist. Funny. What am I, funny like a clown? Things like that have just become second nature. Um, Do the Right Thing, I saw very, very late, and I do remember that. Jeff, I probably, you might remember us talking about this because I saw it, I believe it was, well, actually, I know it was in 2020. It was um, very soon after the George Floyd murder, and I watched it in part because of that, and it struck me just crazy. It's like it could have happened today. Like that movie could have been released today, and it rang so similar to what we saw live in person with a real person being murdered live in front of our eyes, and it was crazy how raw and real it still is. Still was. So that one stuck with me obviously at how much it means and how much it will continue to mean moving forward in our country. So it was pretty pretty impactful on me, and rewatching it again, it was still just as impactful. That, so those are my prior experiences. Jeff?
Yeah, y'all are slackers with the Goodfellas thing. I watched that movie in the 90s when I was way too young to watch that movie for the level of gratuitous violence it contained. My parents, thankfully, they never really had too much issue with violence because they raised me to understand what violence was and when how it shouldn't be used. So that was never a huge issue for them. So they didn't really, they let me watch a lot of movies that maybe I was too young to watch, but I think I turned out okay. And so I saw Goodfellas when I was really young. I think I'd mentioned previously that it was after liking The Godfather so much at a young age, branching out from that and looking at other mafia movies, Goodfellas was the most logical next step to take with that. So that's what I did. And then with Do the Right Thing, it was very recent, like within the last year, so way late for me on that one. And it was we had talked about Spike Lee and Martin Scorsese for this season, but before we had solidified these two as the directors for season two, even we still my wife and I were just looking for a movie to watch, and we saw the Do the Right Thing on streaming, and we were like, you know what, this is everyone talks about this movie, how good it is, we should watch it. So we did. This was probably 6 8 months ago, somewhere in there, and then watched it again recently for this episode. So, and yeah, it's one of those things. It's funny for me because a while back I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time. Stick with me on this. Um, and as I'm watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm just like, man, like why does everyone think this movie is so great? It's so derivative, and it's just like it's every horror movie you've ever seen. The kids stop at this weird gas station and there's these weird people, and then I had to recalibrate my thoughts, and I'm like, this is 1974 when this movie came out. Every movie that I'm thinking of got that from this. And so then once I was able to recalibrate, I was able to realize, okay, now I see. I'm like, 1974, this movie must have been just unbelievably shocking. And it feels almost similar with Do the Right Thing, like you said, Steve, with the George Floyd murder and just so many, all the Black Lives Matter movements and all that sort of thing, that it almost feels like a ripped from the headlines Law and Order type thing based on what happened. But then you remember this was 1989. I mean, this is was that 35 years ago, right? So this
Yeah,
is
predates Rodney King even. I mean,
yeah, I mean, way before its time, talking about all this stuff. And it's, we've with social media and so much, we see all this violence that's committed. We see a lot of violence from police committed on minorities and sorts of things, and everyone's like, why does this seem like it's happening so much? And then you see a lot of the sort of replies from the minority communities are like, it's not new, it's been happening for a long time, we just have the means to capture it and record it and get it to people now so they can see it also. So it just kind of reveals that this is something that's been happening for decades, and even well before
yeah,
that movie was made.
literally
And it's
400 years,
just,
right?
yeah, and it's just it was such a powerful kind of thing. So we'll definitely get into that, but um that was the biggest thing that kind of struck me while watching it. um but first, we can just get into we could talk about Goodfellas first, at least for a little bit, as we kind of um so I think last week or last episode I had promised some hot takes on Goodfellas, and I got them, folks. So I
All
can
right, serve it up.
so my as I said, we kind of, just being in sort of film communities and knowing the sort of film discourse, Goodfellas is what many would probably say is Martin Scorsese, it was Martin Scorsese's best film. But when you say many, that usually doesn't mean everyone. And I am included in that category of not everyone, because I do not believe Goodfellas is Martin Scorsese's best film. In fact, I believe that, this is my opinion, of course, but it may be his most overrated movie. Now, similar to I think I said this.
Ooh.
I said the
Okay.
same thing.
Okay.
I said the same thing about Gladiator for Ridley Scott last year, and I want to be clear, just like I was last season on this. Overrated does not mean bad. Goodfellas is a fantastic movie, but I do kind of I think it's overrated. And I'll tell you why. Now, so this the Goodfellas sort of arc of a movie is one that Martin Scorsese has used multiple times in his career. The sort of build up tear down, if you will, approach, right? Where you start out with a character, they kind of come from nothing, they build themselves up to be this great thing in whatever they're doing, and then it all comes crashing down, right? So Goodfellas, Henry Hill, he's some first line in the movie. As long back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster, right? He's just some kid in the neighborhood. He sees these gangsters. This looks cool, tries to get himself enmeshed in that life, does, boom, takes off, becomes really big in the crime family, and then everything comes crashing down because of some mistakes they made. Very similar to Casino, right? They're just Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, they're just bookie, low level gangsters. They get this opportunity to go to Vegas, boom, everything explodes, and then it comes crashing down. Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort character, he's just some dude working a desk job trying to get whatever, finds a way to commit all this fraud, takes off, comes crashing down. You could even argue Killers of the Flower Moon that just came out last year is a similar type thing because of Ernest, the character that Leonardo DiCaprio plays. You know, he comes in just fresh off the war, looking for something to do. His uncle is like, "Hey, we can make this work. You can get rich doing all this stuff," and he's like, "I love money. Let's do this." So then of course it all comes crashing down for him as well. So um i- it's something that he's and I think with each of those iterations that was in order that I listed those off in terms of how their chronology, and I think Scorsese gets better at it each time. And I think with Goodfellas, since it was kind of the first, there were some personally some mistakes that I feel that he made, and I think for me the biggest issue is, and Nate, you touched on this a little bit last week, when not necessarily this the point that I'm making, but just that over the years Scorsese has really sort of come into um really sort of come to grips with so the fact that so many people that he shows in his movies are bad people. And in Goodfellas it's no different, except for the fact that tonally I think that we end up rooting for Henry Hill a little too much. And this is my biggest criticism with this. There are things that are played for, they they are almost like played for comedy without it doesn't it doesn't give the right juxtaposition that I think he's going for. I think the especially when you look at the scene where they go to Joe Pesci, Tommy's mom's house, played by Martin Scorsese's mom, by the way. But and he's like, "Oh, mom, we need to borrow this butcher knife." You know, and he's talking about, you know, they're all laughing because they're talking that he's made this lie that they had a deer that they hit that got caught in the grill of the car, and they got to cut his hoof off and all this stuff. And it just a lot of that stuff. I think the goal was to show, okay, these men are so cavalier about these evil, horrible things that they're doing. It's just a joke to them. It's just funny, but it almost feels like the viewer is invited too a little bit too much in on the joke, and it doesn't. You know, whereas I look at Casino and Wolf of Wall Street and those other movies, they're much more difficult to watch because you feel like we talked about in Who's That Knocking at My Door, when Harvey Keitel goes in and he says, "I forgive you" to the woman after she had relayed this story about how she'd been sexually assaulted by a previous boyfriend. And it's just like, Nate, you brought up the point. We are meant to think that he is horrible for saying that. And that came across very well. But a lot of the horrible things that they do, it doesn't come across the same to me. And every time that I've watched Goodfellas, that these are just horrible people that should not be venerated. And I don't know, do you guys get any sense of that, or do you just completely disagree with me? Because I feel like a lot of people completely disagree, but just every time I watch Goodfellas, I just can't help but feel that way.
It's kind of what I have called the male dorm room theory that boys will put posters of certain movies up in their dorm room. Goodfellas have being a very good example. The most glaring example, obviously, is like Fight Club, where they
Scarface.
don't Scarface, yeah. Like you're not supposed to be idolizing these people, and there's this risk with Goodfellas, I think in particular, where you're you're putting this out to a group of people that I think missed the point. And is that Scorsese's fault? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that's not his fault. And he's an artist. He's going to put it out, and people can interpret it how they want to interpret it. But there does feel like there is a little bit of danger. Um, they have all Scorsese has always depicted violence in kind of an ironic way, in sort of a funny way. And I think there's times where it works. I think it works a little better in Goodfellas than it does in something like Killers of the Flower Moon, where for me it didn't work. Um, but it's just I see what you're saying. I don't know if it creates the perception in me that now it becomes his most overrated movie, but I do see that there is a little bit of danger to the notion that these guys are, in a cinematic way, despite them being awful, they're depicted as pretty cool. And any particularly young man would watch this movie. I shouldn't say any young man, but a lot of young men would watch this movie and want to be like these people. And I don't know. It's a great point. I completely agree with what you're saying. Where it loses me a little bit is I don't know if that's the filmmaker's fault so much. I'm not entirely sure. Steve, what do you think about that?
If just to interject, if I may, really quick, the only reason I try and say it may be on Martin Scorsese is simply because I've seen him do it since, and I've seen him do it better, and that's the only reason that I put it out there that way. For instance, like when Wolf of Wall Street, like the scene when near the end when Jordan Belfort's sort of crashing down and he punches his wife, the Margot Robbie character, in the stomach. Like that was incredibly difficult to watch. And there's nothing like that in Goodfellas that really makes you think like, holy shit, this guy is a terrible human. To me.
I mean, he's pretty awful to his wife a few times. He puts hands on her. I mean, at one point she is pointing a gun in his face, but arguably that's self-defense. But still, pretty kind of a toxic relationship there on both ends. Yeah, I don't know that it's entirely his fault. I kind of view this as this is the culmination. This is the apotheosis of his desire to tell this story about the Italian kid from New York story. Like this is Who's That Knocked on My Door and Mean Streets leveled up. If we were all kids in the 90s, this is the third evolution. This is the third evolution of the Pokemon of Martin Scorsese's.
This is the Charizard.
Yeah,
The Super Saiyan version of the
right. He finally got a script from I'm not going to pronounce it. I'm going to let you guys pronounce it. I guess we had this discussion beforehand.
Nicholas
He-
Pileggi.
There you go. The guy
He
who
wrote
wrote
the
the book.
book. Yeah.
You
This is
guys know
fun.
that really quick to
Yeah,
interject.
do
Do
it.
you
This
know
is
the
a
cool
good
story
story.
behind Nicholas Pileggi? Okay, this is one of my favorite Hollywood stories. Um, he writes the book. Nicholas Pileggi writes the book, which I think at the time was called Wise Guy, and somebody gives it to Martin Scorsese, and he cold calls him. He just like cold calls the author with the intention of saying like, I would love to make this as a movie. Cold calls him, kind of describes what he likes about the book, and Martin Scorsese says, "I have to tell you, sir, I've been waiting my entire life for this book." And Nicholas Pileggi says, "Mr. Scorsese, I've been waiting my entire life for this phone call." And that is one of my favorite behind the scenes Hollywood stories. That is just so cool for an author like that to write a book, probably with that subject material, kind of thinking like it would be so cool if like Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola wanted to adapt this, and like then he call like Scorsese calls you. I just think that's so cool. Sorry to
That's
interrupt. I love that
the
story.
absolute dream for anybody who's ever
Yeah,
tried to write.
I love that story.
Well, it's the perfect segue also into the point I think I'm trying to make. this is like I said, the culmination of. I think Martin Scorsese, despite him, he seems to be an all around good guy. He's been in the public light long enough that I feel like bad stories would have come out about him by now if he was a bad guy. And he clearly paints bad characters in a bad light, and he shows violence as a bad thing. But there was a part of him as a young man that I think wanted to do this. Like he wanted to live this life at a certain point in his life as a young man. Um, Speaking as a young kid that had a Scarface poster on his dorm wall at one point, because I missed the point from some of these movies when I was younger. There is something enticing about this. So I think this is him getting to kind of fulfill that fantasy a little bit. And even if it's on a subconscious level, I think this was the perfect marriage for him of a good script, good story, and he finally got something that matched up with his ability to make a visual story. He finally got a good enough written script to do it, and that's why I think Goodfellas is so well. That and the actors. I think we have to talk about the actors, and that's one thing I really want to compare between these two movies: the use of these just fantastic actors. But um, so I guess to bring it back around to what you were saying, Jeff, is it overrated? And is it? It might be his Gladiator, in that it's maybe not his best work, but it's his most successful. But I think there's a reason for that. I think it. Martin Scorsese was put on this earth to make Goodfellas. Maybe that's not the only thing he
Okay,
was made
so
to do.
so along those lines, then, do you two both consider this to be his best?
Well, let me put it this way. This is different than last season. This is the biggest difference from this episode last season. We had this great conversation last season where we talked about Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, which is probably, Spielberg would say it's his most important film. He said if a whole other filmography got erased, he would hope Schindler's List is the one that remained. But it's not a good entry point for Spielberg. If you're going to introduce someone to Steven Spielberg, and we kind of use that Beatles analogy of like, Sgt. Pepper's is their best album, but is it their most Beatles album? And Schindler's List is not his most Spielberg film. You're going to show someone Raiders of the Lost Ark or Jaws or Close Encounters, or one of those things. What is different about these two movies and these two filmmakers is these are the entry points that if someone's never seen a Martin Scorsese movie and someone has never seen a Spike Lee movie, you are showing them Goodfellas and Do the Right Thing. And that is why I think we've nominated them. I think why we even just subconsciously nominated these movies as their two best movies
Yeah, you're
because
right.
That's
these
100%
are
agree.
these are absolutely the entry points if they've never seen it. I and this is where it gets into and I'm going to try not to continue to use like the Beatles analogy. I think Goodfellas probably is his best movie. It's not my personal favorite in the way that Sgt. Pepper's isn't my favorite Beatles album. Um, but I would say that
You got to
based kind
start
of
using Rolling Stones as an analogy to fit with the theme.
yeah, I really do. I really do. I had to take a few more drinks this week while I was watching with the bar scenes and stuff. Um, but yeah, I think that they're the entry points, and I think that it's probably if it's not his best film, it is definitely as to your point, it definitely feels like the one he was most born to make. And so that to me is a little bit unshakable when I'm talking about, well, what is their best film? This is the one he was born to make, and it's the one I would absolutely show someone if they've never seen a Martin Scorsese movie. So take from that what you will. I think he's made enough movies now that people probably all have kind of their own favorites. But I think this is the one that is the most definitive of his work, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to, again, overrated doesn't mean bad from me, and it's still I think back to the Roger Ebert axiom of, it's not what a movie's about, it's how it's about it, right? And how this movie is about itself is damn near perfect for the entire run, right? And for what the movie is set out to try and do, it seems like, which is mostly just depict this world and specifically the cavalier violence and the cavalier just bad stuff that they do. It does a good job of depicting that, and that's what makes it so great. That this sort of issue that I have with it is just sort of something that, it's a obviously clearly a personal thing of mine, but also, just again, if for me specifically, Casino, even between these two movies, right? I like Casino better. We'll talk about Casino more in depth in a few weeks, but I just feel like the tone of that movie was a little bit different. But again, when it comes to a movie trying to accomplish what it sets out to accomplish, it's hard to argue that Goodfellas doesn't accomplish that. Of depicting this world and how these people interact, and the scene where Joe Pesci and a young Christopher Imperioli in as Spider, the little bartender drink guy at their little underground poker club thing. And there's this that goes back and forth for the whole movie when Tommy is keeps giving Spider shit, and then finally Spider says one bad thing, and then all of a sudden, boom, he just pulls out his gun and shoots him, and he's dead, and everyone's like, "You're digging the hole this time yourself. I'm not helping you," and all this stuff, and they were all pissed about it, mostly because it ruined their night, not necessarily because Spider dies and all that sort of stuff, but and again, I think part of this is the choice, but I think what makes movies like Casino, Wolf of Wall Street, etc., different a little bit in my eyes is you see a little bit more the consequences of their actions, right? Like you don't see like Spider's mom doesn't come around and says, "Hey Tommy, have you seen Spider recently? He hasn't come home." Something like that. That just you don't see a ton of that kind of stuff, and you don't necessarily need to for this movie because it is again that's not necessarily what they're trying to show, but that's one of the things that there's just this sort of just a little bit that I think if it would have gone a little bit more in this one direction, I think it would have been a little bit would have hit a little bit harder. And for me personally, that would remove this sort of issue I have with it. But
I
again,
mean,
that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to happen. It's hard to, this is a 4 star out of 4 star movie for me, also. But it just
there's
if we're really gonna nitpick at that level,
there's literally a scene where Maury, the wig guy, where his wife comes in and is like, Maury hasn't come home. Something's wrong. I know something's wrong. Because he's been whacked. So I mean,
that's
that's
true. That's true. But and again though, with Maury, right? Like the first time they come close to killing him, where they're like strangling him with the phone cord, right? He's this guy that sells wigs, and his wig comes off, and they both just start laughing like
that's
this
true. They
is
do play it.
some cruel
Yeah.
joke, and it really gets played for comedy. And Maury's like this bumbling idiot, and I don't know stuff like that. It just that's where I'm kind of like the the tone doesn't feel as consistent as like I wanted to. But that's a good point. I had forgotten about that with Maury's wife and everything. So
I mean, you're right. They are walking the line of just how I think you said it, how cavalierly they treat, this line between life and death in this world.
and I look at something like The Sopranos, right? And there's a lot of humor in The Sopranos and in a lot of places that you think maybe it shouldn't be. But over the course of 7 seasons and like 90 episodes, you get more time to sit and just stew over how shitty these people are. And so when you inject the humor a little bit, it kind of has that intended effect that it's supposed to have. When you've got a 2.5 hour movie and you don't get to get the time to sit with them that little bit, then that's where I think it just kind of struggles for me.
Well, and David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, I was not surprised that that's getting brought up. He has always acknowledged that Goodfellas was his template when creating The Sopranos. It's what inspired him to create The Sopranos, and certainly I think you feel a lot of those same things. But to your point, Jeff, I do feel like it is The Sopranos was long. I mean, it went on for several seasons. It had long episodes, and you really got to live and breathe with those characters more, and you got to see them really sense the. I mean, the whole crux of The Sopranos is that the beginning is that it's Tony Soprano going to therapy. I mean, the whole thing, the entire crux of the character is that he doesn't exactly, he's questioning what he does and how he reconciles it with being a family man and being a father. That's the whole point of the character. You definitely don't get anything like that in Goodfellas, but The Sopranos is able to do that because it has a little bit more time to breathe. Um, but The Sopranos is absolutely kind of the cultural, spiritual sequel, if you will, to Goodfellas, and I think David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, always intended it that way.
So another question here. So the this movie we saw a little bit with Mean Streets and Who's That Knocking at My Door. A little bit of I would actually qualify what was in those movies as voiceovers, where the character was talking, but it wasn't we weren't seeing the characters conversing on screen. It was kind of a montage, and the character was talking to somebody else, and they were sort of showing what was happening. But this is the first movie we've seen from Scorsese that specifically deals heavily with narration. And there's a lot of people, I am not one of them in this case, but there are a lot of people that when they criticize Goodfellas or they criticize Scorsese, they strongly dislike narration. There are some people that just do not like narration in movies. And I'm fine with it if it's used well, and nobody uses it better than Scorsese personally. But how did you guys feel about this? Because again, it's the first movie, and I haven't seen everything in Scorsese's filmography, especially from the 70s and 80s, but I don't recall at least any of the major ones, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, etc., that you had narration quite like this. And I think it's because the book was probably so, I haven't read the book personally, but it's so full of, I'm sure, narration that he just wanted to get a lot of that stuff in there. And then it even went further in Casino, but it's really it's essentially fourth wall breaking because the characters are talking to the audience and telling them what's happening. I mean, how did you guys feel about that? I when I first saw Goodfellas, I fell in love with the narration. I've kind of cooled on it. I don't think that it's necessarily as great as I did when I first loved it, but I don't mind it at all, and I like especially in this movie. And again, I think nobody does it better than Scorsese, but there are a lot of people that do have issues. I mean, how do you guys feel?
Well, I think that you have to have it in Goodfellas, and I think it works perfectly in Goodfellas because it sets it up. You don't realize this if you're watching the movie for the first time, but it sets it up that you know, he ultimately goes against his principles. He identifies the people in court at the end, and then he does. He looks directly at the camera and he speaks to the audience. And there's the whole thing about putting him in witness protection. And there's always this sense that, and I don't know if you get this sense, I've kind of always gotten this sense that, like, he's in witness protection, and now you're kind of almost led to believe that is there a purposeful embellishment to some of this? Like, we really don't know if Henry Hill is telling the truth. We don't know that for certain. We are seeing what his recollection and his potential embellishment of the events is, and we as an audience are kind of left to believe what we want to believe. And to bring that point home further, to add to the sort of the sensationalism of it all, is it ends with Joe Pesci firing the gun and this call back to this old silent film where I think Scorsese has said, well, I'm doing that because I'm talking about it's the story is the same. I mean, it's a movie. You're watching a movie and you get to kind of believe what you choose to believe. So I think the narration almost has to be in there for this particular movie just because that's the way the story is supposed to be told. And I think you're supposed to be left with this sense of this guy's not a good guy. He's in witness protection. And we're going to take what we want to from this particular story, this particular embellishment of what he wanted to say.
Nate, you mentioned that the film ends with Joe Pesci, Tommy DeVito firing the gun right at the camera. What and that references an old movie. Is that a direct reference to a specific movie, or is that like a theme? Because I was puzzled by that as well. Like
Scorsese. So there's an old silent film called The Great Train Robbery, and at
oh,
the
okay,
very
yeah,
end of The Great Train Robbery, he has said this. So I'm looking it up right now. 1903, silent film 1903.
yeah, it's one of like the
So
first
1903 is
movies,
like
right?
the very beginning, and it was a big deal at the time because that movie ends with a guy firing a gun directly at the audience.
And people got
But in
scared, right?
1903, people were like, ah, and they freaked out. And Scorsese has said that he did that as an ode to that movie. and almost as an ode to it's all the same story. You know, these crime movies are kind of all the same story, and you lose yourself in it, and you get to believe what you want to believe, and you get to take from it what you want to take from it. And so he himself has said that, and he has specifically referenced that exact movie and has said that he's referencing that movie. So, I mean, that's how I'm going to interpret that, just because Martin Scorsese has exactly said that that's kind of what he's doing, and
It
that's why,
seems
again, just to answer the
kind of
question, I
yeah.
think the narration has to be in there.
And that's, from a filmmaking standpoint, I agree. But my question is for you two, do you personally like it?
I like it. I they're
Like if
in
there was no if there like do you feel like there's a way we talked about the narration in that was added to Blade Runner last year from Ridley Scott and how that we all thought it took away from the movie and it was forced by the studio, etc. So was it too much in Goodfellas? Was it not enough? Was it just great? I mean, do you think there's a better movie? Or it's hard to say better with this one, but you know what I mean. Like, could it have been done differently, and you think would have been as effective, or do you think it was just great the way
I
it
for
was?
this particular movie, I like it the way that it is. Within the filmmaking world, there's kind of this negative opinion of voiceover narration. If you, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Adaptation, written by Charlie Kaufman, with
We saw it
Nicolas
together.
Cage, where he,
It's a
yeah, we
cool
did, yeah,
memory
back
for
in
me,
the,
and I'm
yeah,
very hurt that you
back in
don't
the,
remember this.
okay, my apologies. He goes to he goes to a Robert McKee. Charlie Kaufman has written. Nicolas Cage is playing the screenwriter Charlie Kaufman, and he goes to this screenwriting seminar. And the guide, God help you if you use voiceover narration. God help you. It's sloppy writing, and you're an awful writer if you use it. So in the screenwriting world, there's kind of this negative perception of it. But Scorsese's always used it, and he's used it to great effect. And like I said, I think the way the book is written and the way the story's being told, and the fact that it ends with him going into the witness protection program and he looks right at the camera and talks to you, I think that's how it had to be. For this movie, I really like it. Ask me that for future movies in future weeks, and maybe there's other weeks where I don't like it as much, but I definitely like it for this particular movie.
I agree. I guess it feels like a cop out to say it, but it's so well done. It's integrated well. It's used to propel the narrative forward, and Ray Liotta's performance via narration is so well done that it's hard to complain. I think the reason people hate it, right, is because it's easy just to say, we, we'd, if it's a war movie, they besieged the city and captured it in 10 days. Instead of showing, it's show me, don't tell me, right? But here he's giving color and flavor to things while also showing. He's giving it, additional layers to the performance really via narration. So I like it.
Well, he's also creating he the very opening scene. There's something banging around in the trunk. They pull over, they open it up, the guy is still alive, and they brutally murder him. He stabs him more and stuff, and then De Niro shoots him a bunch of times, and then he juxtaposes that with all my life I wanted to be a gangster. And it's like that what the narration is doing there, that's not something that's been forced in. The narration is creating this juxtaposition between what this horror that you're seeing on screen and what his childlike perception of being in the mob was, and how it's starting to feel different, and you kind of sense this maybe a little bit of a pained expression on his face, um, that works really well with that line because it just feels so different. It feels like it's the opposite. It feels like there's this dichotomy between what he's saying and what's happening.
That's a really good point, and I think again back to my one issue with Goodfellas, it's a similar sort of through line. They this you have this start from the movie. I always wanted to be a gangster. And like you said, there's that pained expression on his face. There's a couple other times, right, where when he's younger and there's a man who gets shot doing something, we don't know what, but he comes up to the sandwich shop or pizza place, wherever they're at, and the guy's shot and he's all bleeding, and everyone's like, leave him alone, Henry, leave him alone. And Henry feels bad. He can't leave him alone. He goes and he gets a bunch of aprons and he helps him to try and stop the bleeding. And the guy takes the aprons and he runs away. And they're all like, "You lost me so many good aprons, right?" They didn't care about the guy at all. And so you kind of have these instances where it's like, okay, Henry's not quite at the same level of these, just not the same level of psychopathy. I don't know if that's the right word, or sociopathy of these people. And he's got a little bit more humanity in him. And there are just a few moments throughout the movie where you see this and it's just a look on his face, or it's just a little bit of something, but then they just never fully explore that, right? And what that does to Henry and how much he's changed. And then it comes to the end, and the final line, right, is just, you know, in this wherever he's at now, he's like, I ask for spaghetti and marinara sauce and I get egg noodles and ketchup. And so it's like that kind of it's actually a good bookend with the idea of I want to be a gangster, because he got to have all these nice things as a gangster, and then now, he's just sitting there with dealing with having to get shitty food at Applebee's or wherever the hell he's getting it, because that's his life now. And but that's sad for him. And I think we also kind of feel a twinge of sadness that he no longer has this life that he wanted, even though it was terrible. And so it kind of goes back to it a little bit again. But I think that's a good point. I wish they would have sort of just hit on that just a little bit more of how much Henry was losing his soul and all that. That it was made apparent, but I just wanted, I hate to keep bringing up Casino because we will talk about it later, but I feel like that is done better in Casino than in Goodfellas. Now, part of this too, again, goes back to, this is definitely a me thing. I understand that, but it's, personal preference. I tend to like bleaker type stories and endings and things, and it doesn't, especially when it's earned, if that makes sense. But it didn't really feel, that's kind of, again, small issue because everything else so well. Like Ray Liotta, though, I mean, talk about performances. Like Ray Liotta is just so dialed in this performance. You talk about this being the movie that Scorsese was born to direct. This is the movie that Ray Liotta was born to be in. And I don't know who won Best Actor that year, 1990. I'd have to look it up, but I would. Our fearless producer Brandon looks like he's gonna look that up for me. Um, but man, Ray Liotta, it's hard to believe that somebody could have beaten him. Maybe when I hear it, it'll make sense. But um, and that actually brings me to
He
my
was he
second.
was not even he was not even nominated.
See, look at that. Oh, Daniel Day Lewis. Dang. Wait,
It
that
looks
is that the is
like
that the 90 Oscars, or is that the Oscars for
this is
1990? Because the
so
90
what
Daniel
No, the
Day
year
Lewis
what
would have
year
clean
won in
after.
'89. So it would be
yeah,
the
Jeremy
90.
so
It would
Irons
be the
won for
91 Oscars
Reversal of
for
Fortune. Kevin
Jeremy
Jeremy Irons
Irons.
Costner
won
was
for
nominated for Dances. Robert De Niro, ironically, was nominated for Awakenings.
Hmm.
yeah, Joe Pesci did win. Joe Pesci
He
won
did win.
Best Supporting
That's
Actor.
my second hot take. I don't
He
think this is
should
Joe
have or should
Pesci's
not have.
best performance. Um, and I think this was a makeup win from the Oscars, because he absolutely should have won for Raging Bull. That is one of the best performances I've ever seen. And we'll talk about that movie later in the season too. But that's my second hot take. I don't think Joe Pesci. I don't even know who he was up against, but um, I don't know if he deserved to win for this movie. I think it was a makeup win, personally.
Looking at these particular actors, I think he absolutely deserved to win that year.
Who else was there?
You've got Andy Garcia in Godfather 3, which is a good performance. Graham Greene in Dances with Wolves. Al Pacino and Dick Tracy, and
I mean,
Bruce
that was.
Davison in
I don't know if it should have
Bruce
beaten.
Davidson
I'm not
and
going to say that should have beaten Joe Pesci, but he was very good in Dick Tracy.
he's good. So yeah, I mean, I think Pesci. The movie that lost. So like Scorsese went years without winning, um, Best Picture and Best Director. The movie that cleaned up that particular year was Dances with Wolves. Kevin Costner won Best Director, and Dances with Wolves won Best Picture, which is a good movie in and of itself. But that's kind of what cleaned up that particular year, and that's why they lost a bunch of awards.
Yeah. So what did you performance wise, what would you like? I think Ray Liotta is probably my favorite performance in the movie. What did you guys like the best?
Well, and I know Steve, you were about to talk about the acting earlier. I think Ray Liotta is definitely the performance that carries the whole thing. I don't even know his name. I think the young kid that's playing Henry Hill at the beginning kind of has that goofy smile and that goofy grin, like he's just kind of surprised by everything. He's just like happy to be a part of this world. I thought he was great. De Niro has had a really long career. It's very, very difficult to say what his definitive role is. There are probably a lot of people out there who would say this is definitely in competition for it, um, which is saying a lot when you've been in Godfather movie and a bunch of other Martin Scorsese movies. Um, I will say I think that this is the definitive in the way that because De Niro and Scorsese have worked together so many times. This is, and I hope I make sense in saying this, how I talk about Goodfellas as the entry point for Scorsese. This is the entry point for also is the entry point for Robert De Niro in Martin Scorsese movies, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily the entry point for Robert De Niro, but it's the entry point for the his personification of I'm an actor in a Martin Scorsese movie and that's what I do and that's what I've built my
They've
career on.
they've made 8 movies together, so it is actually worth having an entry entry point.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely the entry point for him appearing in this director's films. I need to rewatch Raging Bull. That's an interesting hot take. I know he's great in Raging Bull. De Niro's also great in Raging Bull, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn to say that it's their best
De Niro won
performance.
for Raging Bull.
Yeah, I know they're both fantastic in that one as well. So it's an incredibly well acted film. I mean, that's what makes it part of what makes it work so well is I think this is about both the movies. I mean, I think there's something about both Goodfellas and Do the Right Thing that every single character you meet feels like a real person. There's not one thing about any of these people that's forced. You absolutely feel like all of these people at a time and place, maybe not right now, but at a time and place you could have walked up to some of these people on the street and talked to them and they would have been real people. And again, I think that just goes into the personal touch of both of these filmmakers and how they're clearly working with something, both of them, really, really close to the chest. And they're telling really, really personal stories here that matter to them. And they have clearly embedded much of their own lives and their own experiences in these films.
Steve, did you have a favorite performance?
No, I have nothing to add to that. I just wanted to um, just say, when the opening shot of the three of them standing behind that trunk, you just know you're in great hands. You're like, we're gonna be in for an excellent ride here. This was, I think, only the second time I'd seen it, and so the first time you watch it, you go in cold, you don't know what to expect. But this time, I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be great again, and it was quite the treat, and did not disappoint again. So, and as you referred to me saying it earlier, yeah, I did want to talk about both of these films have just like kind of all-star casts. I mean, I guess arguably this one has a few more award winners and things, but um, there's big names in both of them, and I don't know if we want to discuss, which one, quote unquote, used the ensemble cast better. I mean, I guess this one it really is
What's
kind of carried more by a single person because it really is about Hank Hill. That'd be a different movie altogether.
Yeah.
Um, whereas Do the Right Thing's more about this city, this neighborhood that's boiling over. But
Well, one thing that's interesting, and I think we talked last week about no two directors love the needle drop more. And I think these two movies show that no two directors love their casts, their muses more, right? Like, how many people did you see in Goodfellas and Do the Right Thing that are in like, oh, that person was in such and such movie with Martin Scorsese. We already talked about Robert De Niro. They made 8 movies together. He and Joe Pesci made 5 movies together. And then you've got in Do the Right Thing, right? Giancarlo Esposito's in that. He was in School Days, and then you've got just a whole bunch of characters. Obviously, Spike Lee himself, and then we even
John
had a little bit
John
of
Turturro, yeah, John Turturro's in other Spike Lee films as
yep,
well. He uses him a lot. Yeah.
and uh, and then we even got a crossover because I do not know the actor's name, but the guy in Do the Right Thing who's driving through in his convertible and gets sprayed with the water from the fire hydrant has been in multiple Martin Scorsese movies.
Oh yeah,
And
I didn't realize that.
I
That's
think
funny.
was he even I think he was in Goodfellas, wasn't he? I have to
I'm
check
not.
on
I'm not so sure.
that. But anyway, so that's probably
Wikipedia says that apparently Spike Lee wanted De Niro for the role of Sal, but he cast Danny Aiello at De Niro's suggestion, ironically. So that's funny.
who was fantastic, and that's a good. I think that's a
Got
good
nominated
segue,
for best supporting actor, apparently.
and I think that's a good segue into Do the Right Thing. So, I did not have the same sort of issue with Do the Right Thing. One thing I thought that was interesting right from the start. Okay, we've talked about how Do the Right Thing was sort of that third part of the thematic trilogy that Spike Lee had. And starting with She's Gotta Have It, going into School Days, and then into Do the Right Thing. And it was interesting that I don't know if I would have picked up on this having not just watched School Days for last episode and then watching it for this one, but the final line of School Days is Lawrence Fishburne's character yelling, wake up" to the campus. And the very first line of Do the Right Thing is Samuel L. Jackson saying, wake up" to everyone over the radio. I thought that was just a fun little connection. I don't know if that was fully intended by Spike Lee. I think it would have to be. I mean, feels like it almost has to be. But I thought that was a really cool little connection there between the two movies.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
I
you look like
think
amazing.
you were going to say something.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't do the reading this week. I'll do the homework and get back to you on that. But almost, it doesn't seem like something like that would be something he would do inadvertently. That feels very intentional. Yes. And it's interesting. We had a narrator in Henry Hill in the other movie, in Goodfellas, and here we have a narrator in film via Samuel L. Jackson, who was also in the other movie, by the way. He played Stax, who gets executed by Joe Pesci's character. But so both of these movies have a narrator, and that's kind of an interesting point. And anyway, yeah, I'll do the
And
homework.
they both break the fourth wall. Just very briefly for both. I mean, unless you count the narration as breaking the fourth wall, but characters breaking the fourth wall, looking at the camera right at the very end. Henry Hill stops in the middle of his testimony in the court and starts diatribing to the camera, and then there's a sequence in the middle of Do the Right Thing, right, where when we first start to get an idea of okay, the racial injustice in this area is starting to reach a powder keg moment, right? Then he immediately cuts away and then goes from one character to the next of just spitting out racial slur after racial slur, and none of the races involved in the movie are spared from this. It's the white people attacking the black people, and the black people attacking the Hispanic people, and the Hispanic people attacking the Korean people, and so forth. It's just kind of a pretty powerful little instance where you get, and they're all doing it in a way where you can sort of just feel this anger coming from them, right? And so normally you think that's kind of a weird thing to do right in the middle of a movie, but it's sort of, I thought it was really interesting way to do it where you really get this sort of okay, cut right here and then just immediately show okay, everyone's angry, everyone's boiling over, and it's sort of almost like a metaphorical Chekhov's gun to what eventually happens near the end. But it's stuff like that that makes, I think in terms of both these movies have a message, and I think in terms of delivering that message, I think Do the Right Thing was probably it's a little bit more straightforward maybe, but also more powerfully done, I think. And maybe it's because of the message itself. But again, I think this sort of goes back to the point I brought up last episode where sometimes I think Martin Scorsese sort of just says, here's an issue and puts it out there. Whereas I think Spike Lee goes a little bit further and delves deeper into the issues and what they mean for us as people. And I think definitely with Do the Right Thing, you see that contrast between the two.
I think that what I see the most, yeah, I do the right thing for me. I think it probably, if it has a message to tell, it probably tells it and communicates it better. It's difficult to me about comparing these films. It'll be interesting to see where we all land at the end of this episode because I think I have a thought about this, but I think I have a thought, but I don't know, maybe not. Um, I feel like Goodfellas to me is the more entertaining movie. It's definitely a movie that you would sit down and be entertained by more, and is probably a movie you'd be more willing to put on and watch just for the sake of watching it as a movie. Do the Right Thing feels a little bit more like something that is important, like kind of a document, something that you need to see to understand. It to me is inescapable that Do the Right Thing is more relevant today and feels more relevant today. And again, I don't know if that's, I don't think we're grading these filmmakers. Certainly, Spike Lee wanted to make a relevant film. I don't know if either he or Scorsese, 35 years on, would have been able to look at these movies and been like, "Oh yeah, this one's going to be more relevant." I mean, or maybe they would. I mean, Spike Lee certainly has never been a stranger to addressing the problems of race relations in the United States, and maybe he absolutely made this movie with the intention that it would continue to be relevant for decades to come. But Do the Right Thing just feels a little bit more relevant to me on a social level. At the same time, Goodfellas feels a little more relevant to me on a filmmaking level. I feel like people try to emulate Goodfellas a lot more. I mean, like we just said a few minutes ago, like it completely influenced The Sopranos. And there's people who would say The Sopranos is like the greatest television show of all time. And The Sopranos absolutely has influenced this character driven episodic television that is now the dominant storytelling form today. So Goodfellas feels a little more relevant from a filmmaking perspective. Do the Right Thing feels a little bit more relevant from a social perspective, society perspective, and what is important and what our values are in society. It's very hard to grade these films, and also they're both fantastic and they're both so good and they feel so important while you're watching them. So it was really hard for me to kind of think about how I'm going to ultimately grade these movies.
I don't know if I can top that. I think that's 100% accurate. Oh man, this is really tough. I wish we would have used more objective criteria when determining best films, because then we could have drawn a uh, better box around this in order to say
Well,
which one's quote better.
and I think we kind of came around to this idea last season. We were dealing with this as well, where what is the more Spielbergian Spielberg movie versus the Scottian Scott movie? So what that could be, one way to look at this, right? Like which is the more quintessential Scorsese movie and which is the more quintessential Spike Lee movie? And that might actually make it harder, given that both these movies are so very much quintessential movies of these directors. But from a Do the Right Thing standpoint, just to kind of talk about that a little bit, like it's and with this with She's Gotta Have It as well, where I thought, with the idea of just the dynamics of the relationships and everything that was explored in that movie was ahead of its time. I mean, Do the Right Thing feels much more ahead of its time as well. I mean, there was even a small kind of throwaway line almost about global warming in
Yeah.
1989 by one of the characters, and it's yeah. I think you're right, Nate, when you say that. I actually do think probably Spike Lee would have thought of Do the Right Thing as something that he wanted to be not necessarily relevant in the future, but maybe relevant as something of like, hey, this is what happened and this is what spurred change. I don't think he envisioned it being relevant as in this shit is still going on to this day and nothing has changed, or very little has changed in nearly 40 years. So, I do probably think he had that in mind, but yeah, it really felt like when you looked at School Days and you looked at She's Gotta Have It and a lot of the race relations and everything that they talked about, and this was the sort of apex for him. You talked about Steve, you talked about how this was the culmination for Scorsese. Goodfellas was from his first movies, and it really makes sense that this would have been a sort of thematic trilogy for Spike Lee because it did feel like this was a culmination, and it felt like those other two movies allowed him to be as sure-handed as he was with this movie, to where everything sort of came out in the way he layered on all these sort of tensions that were happening in the neighborhood, and how it built as the movie went on until it finally exploded at the end, you know literally in the final context as they light this pizza shop on fire. um it just like, I mean, that's something where, I mean, Spike Lee at such a young age, right, able to do so well with a movie like that. I mean, it's really really impressive to have such a heavy topic and be able to handle it in that way. And I mean, the only thing I will say in terms of, there were like, if I have two minor complaints about Do the Right Thing, it would be um, Spike Lee himself as an actor. I think he did okay as Mars and She's Gotta Have It, but in this movie, I felt he was a little outmatched. He's going up against Danny Aiello and John Turturro and just all these just fantastic actors, and it's just, I think he probably would have been better served to hire a different actor for that role.
You
And
definitely
then
feel like you feel like you're watching Spike Lee, the director.
right, exactly.
And there's maybe an element of maybe he kind of wants that a little bit just because of the nature of the story, but you don't lose him in the role. You
No,
really feel like I'm watching Spike Lee make this very crucial, important point by playing this kind of character, quasi character, maybe a little bit a reflection of himself,
yeah,
maybe a
might
little bit
have
of
self-insert maybe, who knows. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I don't lose him in the role. So I do feel like I completely agree. I feel like just as a movie, it loses a little bit in that regard, just because you really feel like you're watching Spike Lee, the director.
It's interesting you guys say that because I after rewatching it the second time, I liked his performance more because I had seen She's Gotta Have It and seen the Mars Blackman performance, and I was comparing it to that. And not that I didn't like the Mars Blackman performance, I really did, but I almost envisioned the Mookie character as like a more world weary, jaded Mars Blackman, like a Mars Blackman who's now seen even more shit, who's seen even more, you know, killings of unarmed black men, of, you know, not been able to make his rent, shit like that. Um, and still is living on his sister's couch and all this stuff. And so it felt even more, it's kind of understated, but also, he is kind of, like you guys were saying, he's kind of on the outside looking in a way and kind of inserting himself into it and making us, he's not narrating, but he's standing in and kind of leading us around in the story. I don't know. That's interesting. I appreciated it more this time. Um, but he is going up against some real heavyweights, so that's a pretty good point.
I think it's
Man,
fair to say that he was better than he was, and She's Gotta Have It, but still sort of becomes a weak point of the movie just because of how good the entire cast is and Do the Right Thing. And along similar lines, Nate, you had mentioned how, every character feels so real in both these movies. And I agree, except for the Giancarlo Esposito character, bugging out his name. He felt a little bit more caricature to me and kind of took me out a little bit when he was doing his thing in whatever scene. So that might be, again, that's a small little nitpick because overall he was, and I love Giancarlo Esposito, but yeah, I felt like it was kind of a little bit of his School Days character, but just sort of, I don't know, it felt incongruent with the rest of the cast.
I would also say, if we're in the process of nitpicking, the I think the Rosie Perez character is great. I feel like, and he was criticized for this. I feel like her characterization, and particularly the nudity, is maybe not completely earned in this movie, in the way that it's earned in something like She's Gotta Have It. Um, I bring that up only because she has specifically said, Rosie Perez has specifically said that the nude scenes, um, like the close-ups of her breasts, that she was very unhappy while filming that and was very uncomfortable and was not really made to feel comfortable. Um, this is 1989. Times have changed. They have intimacy coordinators now, and but that knowing that and her dissatisfaction with how she was filmed in that way, seeing it again in the film, I'm just kind of like, I don't know if that's even needed or earned. Um, I think that we talked about it. Treatment of women. We talked about it a lot last season, and I think we also kind of addressed last season that sexuality and sex scenes and nudity, particularly when it's of women in the female body, probably needs to be earned. And I feel like it's not entirely earned in this movie. I feel like that's not really those. Thank God for the left nipple. Thank God for the right nipple. I feel like that particular sequence isn't really earned and doesn't add anything to the movie for me. That's kind of always been my biggest nitpick of this movie, and I think that on rewatch, that's definitely the nitpick that kind of remains for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like there's nothing additional to be revealed about the Mookie character by having that whole sex sequence in there. And yeah, so I agree with that. And that's funny. That's interesting because I hadn't even thought about that as a um as a point. I just kind of was like, this is a sort of awkward scene, and then it was just over. But yeah, that's a really good point. Um so yeah, I guess we can kind of get down to making our decisions here. And this is an incredibly tough week. I mean, both of these movies, despite my nitpicks with both of them, are fantastic films, right? I mean, it's inarguable that these are both good movies, right? And they were both nominated for Best Picture, right? Even though neither of them won, but they were at least both nominated. Almost certain that's the case because I
I
remember.
know. Um, Do the Right Thing was not nominated for Best Picture.
nominated
Really
for screenplay, and Danny Aiello was nominated for supporting actor.
surprising.
In fact, another fun fact that I'll throw in at that year's ceremony, Kim Basinger, the actress Kim Basinger, uh, she had to present an award for something, and I don't know the exact quote. I wish I had it here, but she said something to the effect of, like off script, said there were many, many great films that told a very special kind of truth, but the most truthful film this year was a movie called Do the Right Thing, and kind of called out the Academy. And apparently, what has always been said is, and I'm going to work it in this season. You knew I would. Kim Basinger at the time was dating Prince, who was a
There we go.
who was a personal friend of Spike Lee, and Prince had kind of convinced her to say that and make a point about the fact that that movie was not nominated for Best Picture. So it was not nominated for Best Picture, and they even made there was a little quibble about it from Kim Basinger at that year's Oscars.
Let's see. What should it have beat out? Driving Miss Daisy. You know, I've never seen that.
Oh, it should have
Uh,
beat out Driving Miss Daisy.
So
which
funny.
one?
So the funny thing is that you like you could argue, we won't necessarily do it right now, but you could argue that Do the Right Thing being Spike Lee's best movie, his second best might be Black Klansman, right? And Black Klansman was nominated for Best Picture, that I know, and that lost to Green Book, which was
Oh yeah,
essentially the reverse
Driving
Driving
Miss.
Miss Daisy.
Yeah.
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 And it's
Uh,
like, because I remember there was some whole thing about how Spike Lee was very upset about
oh
losing to
shit.
Green Book, and probably should have been. But anyway, what are the other movies besides Driving Miss Daisy in
Born on the
'89?
4th of July.
I mean, that was pretty good.
Dead Poets Society.
Pretty good.
Field of Dreams.
Nope, no way. Definitely
My
over Field of Dreams.
My
I'm
Left
sorry, I
Foot.
hate that. You know, another hot take. I hate Field of Dreams. I
Okay.
did a baseball podcast for 8 years, and I hate Field of Dreams. You want to talk about overrated movies? There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Right? If we ever do so many seasons that we get to Kevin Costner as a director, even though he didn't direct Field of Dreams, I'm going to bring it up because I dislike that movie so strongly. Anyway, so as we're sort of
Oh,
nearing the end here, so no Best Picture nomination for Do the Right Thing. Should have been, but um, ugh, man, this is really tough. I had not made a decision. Was kind of hoping that our thoughts would lead us one way or another, and they didn't necessarily.
hang on.
So,
How are we doing this? Do I have to be the tiebreaker since you guys are
You're the,
theoretically the advocates?
well, Nate,
yep,
did
we're
you?
the
Oh,
Did you?
advocates.
man. All right.
I'll go first.
I
And
have
I
my
will
pick.
say,
Okay, you go first, and I'll give my pick.
okay.
Steve, you'll break the tie if you need to.
I think, despite the tenor of this episode, I think I might have to go with Goodfellas on this, just because I think it is the more Martin Scorsese movie. And like if you want to say, even though to be clear, I don't necessarily think that either of these movies are the best. And we will talk about the movies that I do think are the best from these directors further in the season. But um yeah, I think, like you said, Steve, Martin Scorsese was put on this earth to direct Goodfellas. For what that movie wants to be, I think it is incredibly successful. But I agree with what you said, Nate, as well, that Do the Right Thing is leaps and bounds a more important film. But I think filmmaking wise, and as a uh, as a showcase for the director, I think Goodfellas takes it for me.
Sorry, Steve, I'm going to put you in a tough spot here. I'm going to go with Do the Right Thing. And the reason I'm going to go with Do the Right Thing is because I can't, as you just said, Jeff, I can't shake the feeling that Do the Right Thing is more important. And I'm reminded of this past week, the Ukrainian filmmaker who won Best Documentary at the Academy Awards and said something immensely profound that he said, I think I am the only filmmaker who will get up here tonight and say, I wish I had not made this film. That he wished that he had not been, that his country had not been placed in a position where he would have to document his country being invaded by another country. I think that Martin Scorsese was born to make Goodfellas because he wanted to, And I think Spike Lee was born to make Do the Right Thing because he had to. And when I think about it, it comes down to what is the ultimate purpose of film? Is it to entertain or is it to document something? And and there's no right answer to that question. They're both right. For me, I am going to err on the side of this week that I think it's more important to document something. I think this is a movie that Spike Lee had to make, and we see in the world that we are still living in that it had to be made. And it had to be made at the time, and we have to keep going back to it and watching it over and over and discussing it because it's still shockingly relevant. And I have to pick it. I love Goodfellas. It's nothing against Goodfellas. I'm gonna lean on the side of the important document over the wildly entertaining, emblematic Scorsese movie. So I picked Do the
Well,
Right Thing.
it's a good thing I went first because you might have swayed me if you would have gone first. Damn, that was well said. And now I feel bad. I'm not changing my vote though. I'm not changing it.
Okay. I would because
Uh,
I'm glad you're not because I want to see where the uncomfortable position that Steve is now in.
well, you. Oh God, my cat. Who
Your cat
maybe
has
this
an
is
opinion about
symbolic.
this.
He's both black and white, guys. This is look at this. Look at this symbolic.
There we go. There it
Um.
is.
Anyway, Nate, you actually made it easier for me with that eloquent speech. I was the second that you made it when you said that you were going to make it tough. I hung my head in anxious. Oh my God, Tucker, my cat. Sorry, guys. Um, yeah, your eloquent speech there swayed me. I think all those points you raised are just spot on. So I'm not going to keep you guys, uh, waiting. I think all of that is compelling. So Do the Right Thing, I think, is the winner. I'm going to go with that. Not only all those points you raised, but there's one other point that I think I thought about while you were saying all those things. Those beautiful, beautiful honeyed words. Both of these movies tell stories about kind of timeless, things that are um, integral to the American experience, right? Crime and coming up and struggling for trying to get what's yours and whatever. But one of them is uniquely American. The experience that we've had with race in this country, you know, um, crime and organized crime. That's something that's kind of been around forever in every part of the world. But the things that we've done to black people and people of all minorities has been pretty awful, and that's just so uniquely American that I think um, we'll go ahead and we'll do the right thing, and we'll put our finger on the scale there, and
Always,
yeah,
right?
and it's in our freaking theme song. Although I guess we have a Goodfellas bit in there too. So there you go,
All right.
Nate. It was you though. You
That's
you won me over.
that's an early lead for Spike, right? He's up
That
two
is
nothing
that
Yeah,
already.
2-0 for Spike Lee. So that is a surprising development from the first 2 weeks, especially with Goodfellas being one of them. So
yeah. That's an
that
interesting.
yeah. So
It's
that
just such
wraps
a
it up.
universally acclaimed movie.
And that wraps it up for this week. As we look to next week, episode 3, our theme for the week is paranoia. We have another classic from Martin Scorsese, Taxi Driver, also starring Robert De Niro. And then we have Summer of Sam from Spike Lee. That's kind of a different one for especially for that time. Spike Lee in the 90s he kind of started branching out a little bit more and doing different types of films and different genres, and that was one of
So,
them.
have you guys seen that one?
It's been a long
Never
time.
seen it.
I feel like it's very. I've not seen it either, and my perception is that it's a very kind of more standard paint by the numbers movie for Spike Lee. You know what I mean? Just a kind of a stock crime thriller rather than a quote unquote Spike Lee joint. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
perception accurate based on what you guys know?
From what I recall, yeah, like it always felt it felt to me almost like a like if you would have said David Fincher had
Yeah.
directed Summer of
Yeah.
Sam back in 98 or whenever it came out, I would have been like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Very, very
it's
intrigued by this.
definitely very much like Inside Man, where if you it it's you know it's great because Spike Lee is Spike Lee, but it's not a movie that, do the right thing, you immediately are like, okay, that's Spike, besides the fact that he's in it, of course, but
Right.
you're definitely
Who's that
like,
guy?
that's a Spike Lee movie. But yeah, Summer of Sam, if you wouldn't have known, you would be like, wow, that's kind of crazy. So
Right.
I think that's very interesting.
Be interested to see what he brings to it. So
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be next week. So 2-0 Spike Lee, early lead here as we've got 13 weeks. So that's 11 more to go, folks. Stay with us. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, please go back. You've only got one to catch up on, and then you can be up with us. And like I said, next week, if you want to join with us and watch in Taxi Driver and Summer of Sam, we'll be discussing all next week for our Paranoia Week. So until then, thank you all for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.